Hi everybody, welcome to Midweek this week. Last week we talked about all the good things coming up. Today, well, I want to wrestle with a question that I hear a lot. What kind of church do you go to? When people ask that question, I usually think of certain things, and they're kind of like wanting to know, well, do you have a Bible? What's your commitment to the Bible? And a lot of people recently, especially, I'd say in the last maybe year or two, one of the things we hear all the time is, man, you preach the Bible. You're kind of a Bible church. I think that's one way to answer it. It's like, what kind of church do you go to? Well, one that believes in the Bible. Another one is like, well, what kind of church do you go to? We're a mission-focused church. Man, we have a commitment to world mission. I think there's some churches that's kind of their identifying point. What kind of church do you go to? Well, I go to a Bible church, or I go to a missions church, or another one that I hear a lot is this, I go to a church that has great worship. And as I ask them, well, what does that mean? Well, people sing. If I were to look at our church and say, well, what kind of church do I go to? Clearly, probably one of the highest compliments we ever get. And we've gotten it a lot recently. I got it last week. It's like, man, you preach from the Bible. Honestly, one of my thoughts is like, what do they preach from where you came from? And just that commitment to the scriptures, I think that defines us. I think missional church across the street and around the world, that defines us. Yeah, we're committed with 31 different partners or 32 different partners all over the world. We are a Bible church. We're a missions church. If you sit where I sit on a Sunday morning or a Saturday night, you're going to hear that we're a worshiping church. People sing. Man, they are not back there going, I dare you. No, they are engaged. They sing. It's loud. It's engaged. They clap. We're a worshiping church. I want to add one more. Probably never heard of this one, but I'm going to throw it out. What kind of church do you go to? I want to go to a church where no one sits alone. Let that sink in. I'm with you. I want to go to a Bible church. I want to go to a missional church. I want to go to a worshiping church. I also want to go to a church where no one sits alone. Let me tell you 3 stories. They all happened here. Young lady went to a group. She walked over to the group. A friend walked her over, kind of dropped her off. Here you go. Walked away going, oh man, I hope this is a good experience. Came back after the community group, came into the worship center and said, hey, do you mind if I not sit with you? I got some friends that want me to sit with them. Friends, this is your first time to church. Yeah. And she sat with them. I'm going to go do some things with them, the rest of this weekend. That group would not let her sit alone. When she came in, she was brand new. They didn't have their clique of friends. They didn't like, hey, I've got my friends. I don't need you. They took her in, made her a part. They adopted her. They invited her, and they welcomed her. She didn't sit alone. There's another one. This has to do with a younger group. New family came. Student went in. There was another student that went up and said, hey, and she introduced herself and gave her a name and said, hey, why don't you come and sit with me? From the beginning, this girl hit the door and immediately had somebody say, I don't want you to sit alone. I don't want you to walk in here and not know anyone. And she left her group, went and invited this other person so that she wouldn't sit alone. Third story. Person walks into a room. The room is full. A lot of different places. This individual goes to a table. It's full. Goes to another table. It's full. Goes to a certain number of tables. Never got invited. Never had anyone say, hey, join us. Turned around, walked out, and went home. We can't get this thing perfectly. I'm not here to find fault. I'm just here to tell you, I want to go to a church where no one sits alone. Who's likely to sit alone? Maybe it's the widow that comes to church whose husband passed away, who crossing that barrier to come to church alone is maybe one of the hardest things she or he has done in years. And they sit down and they wonder, am I going to have to go through this entire service alone? I want to attend a church where no one sits alone. Who might sit alone? That's a widow, a widower. Might be a new person who hears about our church and says, wow, they preach the Bible, and they come and they sit down, and this huge group of 400, 500, 600 people feels very, very lonely because there's no one that comes and sits with them. I want to go to a church where no one sits alone. You know what that means? It means when you come to church, you're not here primarily to meet your friends. You're here on assignment. You're here willing to leave a group of your friends and say, hey, let's go invite this person. It means that when you're sitting at a table, you always have room for somebody else. You can always add another chair. You can always make space. Why? Because no one should sit alone. No one. When they come to a church, no matter how full we are, I ought to be willing to move over and say, hey, come sit with us. It's a church where we're aware, our eyes are open. We're not, creating this holy moment where my eyes are closed and I'm clueless of what's going on around me. My eyes are open. I'm ready for the body of Christ. I'm mindful of the person who's alone. I want to go to a church absolutely that's biblical, absolutely that is committed to mission, and hugely, hugely committed to the worship of God. But I'll tell you what makes a church alive. Yes, those three. But it's a church that walks in with their eyes open, mindful of the person who comes, mindful of the widow who's making that first step to come back to church without their spouse. And that is a huge and at times really difficult step. Imagine the change. It's if you go over and sit next to them and say, can I sit next to you? You've changed that person's day. I want to go to a church where nobody sits alone. Would you join me? Would you join me in walking in here on a Sunday or a Saturday with your eyes open? Being willing to actually go over and sit next to a person, and being willing to move in your row of chairs and say, hey, come sit here. Maybe even if you're at a Bible study or at a large event and your table is full, you go grab. I was at a restaurant the other night and we didn't have enough chairs at the table we were sitting at. And I went over to this person and said, hey, can I borrow your chair? Why? Because I didn't want that one person to be sitting off somewhere else in the restaurant. They were a part of us. Imagine a church thinking that way. I don't care how big the table is. We got room for one more. Why? I want to go to a church where nobody sits alone. I bet you do too. Let's do it together this weekend and the next weekend and the following weekend. This weekend, we're going to get back into 1 Corinthians again. We're in chapter 10. And actually, we're there, kind of a connected subject. How do we use our freedom? Do we use our freedom to do what we want to do, or do we use our freedom to bless and encourage and love other people? That's where we're at in 1 Corinthians 10. So I hope you come and join us this weekend. All three services are exactly the same, Saturday night to Sunday morning. And make sure you bring a friend. Hey, by the way, make sure you open your eyes, because there's going to be somebody here that needs you. Because we go to a church where no one sits alone. I love you. Have a great week. I hope it turns out fantastic. And I hope you love rain, because you're going to get a lot of it. God bless you.